The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning, but there was a tension in the air that made it almost suffocating. People had been arriving for hours, some whispering quietly to each other, some staring at the judge's bench, waiting for the trial to begin. The room itself was large, with high ceilings and rows of polished wooden benches, but it didn't feel empty or calm. It felt heavy, as if every eye, every breath, was waiting for something important to happen. The sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the room, making the polished floors glimmer and giving the whole place a sense of seriousness that was hard to ignore. At the center of this tense atmosphere was the young black girl, standing near the front, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She didn't fidget or look nervous like many of the people around her might have. Instead, she seemed aware of the eyes on her, aware of the whispers that floated through the courtroom, yet she held herself with quiet confidence. There was something different about her presence. It was not loud or demanding, but it carried a weight that made people pay attention. People instinctively leaned forward, wanting to see what she would do, wanting to hear what she had to say. The judge, a stern-looking man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, shuffled some papers, glancing occasionally at the young girl. He seemed curious, as if even he could feel that this trial would take a turn no one was expecting. The lawyers on both sides were whispering to their assistants, glancing at their notes, trying to predict what the girl might say. Nobody knew exactly what she would do, but everyone felt that the moment she spoke, it would change the energy in the room. The spectators were a mix of family members, journalists, and random people who had heard about the case. Each person brought their own expectations and judgments, but all of them were united by curiosity. Even the smallest sounds, like the creak of a bench or the scratch of a pen, seemed louder in the quiet, as if the courtroom itself was holding its breath. The air was thick with anticipation, making it almost impossible to focus on anything else. The walls of the courtroom were lined with tall wooden panels, and the judge's bench sat at the front, elevated slightly so that he could look over everyone. Behind him hung the official seal, a reminder of the authority in the room. Everything about the place screamed seriousness, order, and rules, but underneath all of that, the energy felt unpredictable, as if something unexpected could happen at any second. Even the young girl seemed to notice the weight of the moment, but instead of shrinking under it, she seemed to embrace it. She looked around at the room, the people, the judges, the lawyers, the cameras, and took it all in. Her eyes moved carefully, observing without judgment, her mind clearly working as she prepared to speak. There was a calmness in her expression, but underneath it was a spark, a hint that she had something important to say, something that could change everything in the room. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each second stretching longer than the last. People shifted in their seats, some trying to appear casual, some barely able to sit still. Everyone knew that they were waiting for a turning point, though no one could guess exactly what it would be. Every person in the room was thinking about the same thing. What would the young girl say, and how would it affect the trial? The tension was almost electric, filling every corner of the room, pressing down on everyone like a heavy cloud. Outside the courtroom, people had gathered, drawn by curiosity and news of the unusual trial. Some were reporters scribbling notes and preparing cameras, hoping to catch the moment live. Some were neighbors or friends who had heard whispers of the young girl's bravery, hoping to witness history. Even those outside seemed to sense the weight of the moment, though they were separated by doors and walls. Their anticipation added to the invisible pressure in the room, as if the entire building, inside and out, was waiting together. Inside, the air felt heavy but alive, filled with the possibility of something unforgettable happening. Everyone seemed to know, even subconsciously, that they were about to witness a moment that would stay in their memories long after the trial ended. The quiet tension, the polished wood, the serious faces, and the calm, confident presence of the girl combined to create a scene that felt like it belonged in a movie, yet it was real, raw, and completely unscripted. The courtroom had become more than just a place for a trial. It had become the stage for a moment that could stun everyone present. As the judge looked up from his papers, and the lawyers prepared their notes, all eyes remained on the girl, waiting, watching, anticipating. It was a silence that was louder than any words, a pause that made every heartbeat feel heavier. Everyone knew that in a few moments, something extraordinary would happen, and that the whole courtroom, including themselves, would be changed by what they were about to witness. The young girl who stood at the front of the courtroom was unlike anyone the room had seen before. She was not tall, and she did not have the kind of presence that demanded attention by force, yet there was something about her that made people turn their heads instinctively. It was in the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence in her posture, the steady gaze that seemed to see everything without fear. Even the seasoned lawyers and judges, who had spent years in courtrooms full of drama and tension, could not help but notice her. Her name was Aaliyah, a bright and thoughtful teenager from a neighborhood that had faced more challenges than most could imagine. She had grown up in a world where people often judged her before they truly knew her, yet instead of letting that define her, Aaliyah had learned to listen, observe, and prepare herself for the moments that mattered. She had a mind that worked quickly, analyzing every detail, every tone, every glance, and she had learned to use that mind to her advantage. Aaliyah's life outside the courtroom had been far from easy. Her family had struggled to make ends meet, and she had witnessed situations that forced her to grow up faster than her peers. Despite the hardships, she had never lost her curiosity or her sense of justice. Her mother often told her that words had power, that the right words spoken at the right time could change everything. Aaliyah had taken that lesson to heart, and now, as she stood in the courtroom, it was clear that she was ready to put it into action. What made her presence so striking was not just her intelligence, but her courage that did not come from arrogance or bravado, but from a deep understanding of who she was and what she believed in. She had learned to speak when it mattered, to listen when it mattered, and to act when it mattered. In a world that often tried to silence voices like hers, she had found her own strength, and now she was about to use it in front of the entire courtroom. Even her appearance reflected her personality, simple yet purposeful. Her hair was neatly tied back, her clothes were modest, but she wore them with a quiet pride. It was clear she had prepared for this moment, not to impress anyone with flashy outfits or loud gestures, but to present herself as she truly was, someone who deserved to be heard. There was no hint of fear in her eyes, only focus and determination, and that alone made people sit up straighter, paying closer attention to every small movement. People in the courtroom began to whisper about her quietly, speculating on what she might say or do. Some of the spectators assumed she would be nervous or stumble, but Aaliyah had spent years preparing herself for moments like this. She had practiced speaking her mind, standing her ground, and presenting the truth clearly and confidently. This was her moment, and she was ready. Her teachers and friends had always described her as unexpectedly brave, someone who would surprise people not with loud actions, but with quiet determination and insight. That reputation had followed her to the courtroom, though now it was on display in a way that everyone could witness firsthand. Even the judge seemed to notice, leaning slightly forward, as if sensing that this young girl was about to deliver something extraordinary. Aaliyah's mind raced through every scenario in the back of her head, yet outwardly she remained calm. She didn't fidget, she didn't whisper, she didn't glance nervously at the lawyers or the audience. She simply observed, taking in the room, measuring the reactions, and preparing herself for the right moment to speak. Her eyes moved steadily from the judge to the lawyers to the spectators, as if silently telling everyone that she understood the weight of this moment, and she was ready to carry it. Even before she spoke, Aaliyah had already captured the attention of the courtroom. There was an unspoken sense that what she was about to say could change the direction of the trial. It was the kind of presence that didn't rely on words yet still spoke volumes. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for her to release the words that could stun everyone. Aaliyah, despite her youth, was more than just a participant in the trial. She was a force, a mind that had endured challenges and emerged stronger, a voice that had learned the importance of timing and courage, and a presence that reminded everyone that true impact doesn't come from power or status, but from clarity, honesty, and the willingness to stand for what is right. And in that moment, standing in the front of the courtroom, Aaliyah seemed to carry the weight of all that she had learned in her young life. Her determination was quiet but undeniable, and everyone who looked at her could feel it. The young girl was ready, and the courtroom had no idea just how unforgettable this moment was about to become. The young girl who stood at the front of the courtroom was unlike anyone the room had seen before. She was not tall, and she did not have the kind of presence that demanded attention by force, yet there was something about her that made people turn their heads instinctively. It was in the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence in her posture, the steady gaze that seemed to see everything without fear. Even the seasoned lawyers and judges, who had spent years in courtrooms full of drama and tension, could not help but notice her. Her name was Aaliyah, a bright and thoughtful teenager from a neighborhood that had faced more challenges than most could imagine. She had grown up in a world where people often judged her before they truly knew her, yet instead of letting that define her, Aaliyah had learned to listen, observe, and prepare herself for the moments that mattered. She had a mind that worked quickly, analyzing every detail, every tone, every glance. And she had learned to use that mind to her advantage. Aaliyah's life outside the courtroom had been far from easy. Her family had struggled to make ends meet, and she had witnessed situations that forced her to grow up faster than her peers. Despite the hardships, she had never lost her curiosity or her sense of justice. Her mother often told her that words had power, that the right words spoken at the right time could change everything. Aaliyah had taken that lesson to heart, and now, as she stood in the courtroom, it was clear that she was ready to put it into action. What made her presence so striking was not just her intelligence, but her courage that did not come from arrogance or bravado, but from a deep understanding of who she was and what she believed in. She had learned to speak when it mattered, to listen when it mattered, and to act when it mattered. In a world that often tried to silence voices like hers, she had found her own strength, and now she was about to use it in front of the entire courtroom. Even her appearance reflected her personality, simple yet purposeful. Her hair was neatly tied back, her clothes were modest, but she wore them with a quiet pride. It was clear she had prepared for this moment, not to impress anyone with flashy outfits or loud gestures, but to present herself as she truly was, someone who deserved to be heard. There was no hint of fear in her eyes, only focus and determination. And that alone made people sit up straighter, paying closer attention to every small movement. People in the courtroom began to whisper about her quietly, speculating on what she might say or do. Some of the spectators assumed she would be nervous or stumble, but Aaliyah had spent years preparing herself for moments like this. She had practiced speaking her mind, standing her ground, and presenting the truth clearly and confidently. This was her moment, and she was ready. Her teachers and friends had always described her as unexpectedly brave, someone who would surprise people not with loud actions, but with quiet determination and insight. That reputation had followed her to the courtroom, though now it was on display in a way that everyone could witness firsthand. Even the judge seemed to notice, leaning slightly forward, as if sensing that this young girl was about to deliver something extraordinary. Aaliyah's mind raced through every scenario in the back of her head, yet outwardly she remained calm. She didn't fidget, she didn't whisper, she didn't glance nervously at the lawyers or the audience. She simply observed, taking in the room, measuring the reactions, and preparing herself for the right moment to speak. Her eyes moved steadily from the judge to the lawyers to the spectators, as if silently telling everyone that she understood the weight of this moment, and she was ready to carry it. Even before she spoke, Aaliyah had already captured the attention of the courtroom. There was an unspoken sense that what she was about to say could change the direction of the trial. It was the kind of presence that didn't rely on words yet still spoke volumes. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for her to release the words that could stun everyone. Aaliyah, despite her youth, was more than just a participant in the trial. She was a force, a mind that had endured challenges and emerged stronger, a voice that had learned the importance of timing and courage, and a presence that reminded everyone that true impact doesn't come from power or status, but from clarity, honesty, and the willingness to stand for what is right. And in that moment, standing in the front of the courtroom, Aaliyah seemed to carry the weight of all that she had learned in her young life. Her determination was quiet but undeniable, and everyone who looked at her could feel it. The young girl was ready, and the courtroom had no idea just how unforgettable this moment was about to become. The courtroom had never been quieter. Every person in the room seemed to lean forward, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for the young girl to speak. Aaliyah, standing near the front, finally lifted her gaze to meet the eyes of the judge, then the lawyers, then the audience. For a brief second, it felt like time had slowed. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause, marking the gravity of the moment. She took a steady breath, not because she needed to calm herself, but because she wanted everyone in that room to understand that what she was about to say mattered. The words she had prepared, the careful way she had observed the courtroom, and the courage she had carried with her all these years were ready to be released. The murmurs among the spectators faded completely as everyone sensed that this was not an ordinary statement. It was a statement that would ripple through the room, changing everything. Aaliyah began to speak, her voice calm but firm, carrying more weight than anyone had expected from someone her age. Every syllable cut through the tension like a blade, precise and deliberate. She didn't raise her voice or try to shout over anyone, she didn't need to. Her words were sharp, honest, and impossible to ignore. They demanded attention, not through force, but through the undeniable power of truth. As she spoke, the expressions in the courtroom began to change. The judge leaned forward, his eyes widening in surprise, his hand tightening slightly on the papers before him. The lawyers, usually so composed and confident, exchanged quick, startled glances, as if realizing for the first time that they were hearing something they had never expected. The witnesses, whose testimony had seemed certain, shifted uneasily, their confidence shaken by the clarity and insight in her words. Even the spectators, who had come with curiosity and perhaps a bit of doubt, were captivated. Some held their breath, others whispered under their breath, and many sat completely still, unable to look away. Aaliyah's words did not just address the facts of the case, they reached into the heart of the situation, pointing out truths that had been ignored, overlooked, or hidden behind confusion and doubt. It was as if she had peeled away the layers of the courtroom's noise and revealed the simple, undeniable reality beneath. Her courage was not just in what she said, but in how she said it. In that moment, she became more than a witness or a participant, she became a force, a voice that could not be silenced, a presence that made everyone in the room reconsider what they thought they knew, the usual power dynamics of the courtroom, the authority of the judge, the strategies of the lawyers, the influence of the witnesses. None of it mattered in the face of her clarity and bravery. Aaliyah's words resonated because they were honest, rooted in observation and understanding, not in anger or theatrics. She pointed out inconsistencies, highlighted the truth that others had missed, and spoke with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. It was a rare combination, knowledge, courage, and timing, all converging in a single, unforgettable moment. The courtroom reaction was immediate. The judge, usually composed and unshakable, blinked slowly, clearly processing what he had just heard. One of the lawyers pressed a hand to their mouth, struggling to respond, while the other seemed momentarily frozen, unsure how to proceed. Even the spectators seemed momentarily suspended in disbelief, their eyes following her every movement as if afraid that looking away would make them miss something essential. It was a moment of revelation, a turning point that no one had predicted. Aaliyah had spoken not just to the courtroom, but to every person in it, challenging their assumptions, commanding their attention, and leaving them stunned. The silence that followed was not awkward, it was profound. It was the silence of people who had just witnessed something extraordinary, a moment that would be remembered long after the trial ended. And in that silence, Aaliyah stood quietly, knowing she had done exactly what she needed to do. Her words had pierced through tension, doubt, and pretense, and for a moment, the courtroom belonged not to the judge, not to the lawyers, not to the witnesses, but to her. Every eye was on her, every mind engaged with her truth, and in that moment, she had become unforgettable. The courtroom erupted, not with noise, but with a collective shock that hung in the air, thick and electric. Every person present, from the judge to the farthest spectator in the back, seemed to be frozen for a moment, their minds struggling to process the weight of what they had just heard. Aaliyah's words had landed like a powerful stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through everyone in the room. The judge, a man known for his calm, unwavering demeanor, leaned forward, resting both elbows on the desk before him. His eyes were wide, his usual measured expression replaced by astonishment. It was as if he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about the case, trying to measure the depth of what the young girl had just said. For the first time in years, he seemed momentarily disarmed, caught in a moment that no law book or procedure could prepare him for. The lawyers were equally affected, though in different ways. One of them, normally sharp and unshakable, pressed a hand to their forehead, muttering under their breath, glancing at their notes as if hoping the words on the page could somehow erase the impact of her statement. The other leaned back slightly, eyes narrowed, trying to maintain composure, yet a flicker of doubt betrayed their confidence. It was clear that no one had anticipated this level of insight, this precision, this quiet power. The witnesses, some of whom had spoken with certainty moments before, shifted nervously, realizing that the young girl had noticed details that even seasoned lawyers had overlooked. She had pointed out truths so plainly, so undeniably, that it was impossible to argue with them, and the weight of her observation settled on the room like a heavy, undeniable truth. Even those who had been skeptical before could not ignore the clarity and courage of her words. Among the spectators, the reactions were immediate and diverse. Some gasped quietly, covering their mouths with their hands, unable to believe that a teenager could speak with such authority and insight. Others whispered to one another, exchanging astonished looks, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. Some simply sat in silence, captivated, eyes locked on her, as if trying to memorize every expression, every gesture, every word. They knew they were watching something extraordinary. A moment that would not be forgotten. Even the air in the courtroom seemed different, charged with energy, heavy with anticipation, yet vibrating with awe. It was not chaos, but a kind of quiet upheaval, a collective realization that the trial had shifted in a way no one could have predicted. Aaliyah's calm, confident voice had become the center of the room, and every other sound, every other argument, seemed to revolve around her. People began to react in subtle ways, shifting in their seats, leaning forward, frowning in thought, or nodding slightly in agreement. The effect was not just emotional, it was intellectual, forcing everyone in the room to reconsider what they thought they knew, to reevaluate the assumptions they had made. It was rare to witness such influence from someone so young, yet she had accomplished it effortlessly, naturally. Even the courtroom staff, often unnoticed in the flow of proceedings, seemed to pause, their eyes drawn toward her, sensing the gravity of the moment. The stenographer's fingers hovered over the keyboard, the bailiff's stance became straighter, and the clerk looked on, realizing that they were part of a historic moment that would be remembered long after the trial concluded. Aaliyah herself remained composed, her expression calm but focused. She did not gloat, she did not seek attention, she simply stood there, letting the truth of her words resonate, allowing the reactions around her to reflect the power of honesty, courage, and clarity. In that moment, she was not just a participant in the trial, she had become the force around which the entire courtroom revolved. The silence that followed her statement was not awkward, it was reverent, filled with the weight of understanding, of recognition that they had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that would linger in their minds, influence their judgments, and remind everyone present of the power of one voice spoken with courage and precision. The courtroom had reacted not just to words, but to truth, and in doing so, it had been forever changed. The moment Aaliyah finished speaking, the courtroom felt different, almost transformed. The words she had delivered were not just heard, they had landed, creating a shift in the atmosphere that no one could ignore. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted from the room, revealing the truth that had been hidden beneath layers of doubt, tension, and assumption. Every person present felt the change, though none could put it into words. The judge leaned back slightly in his chair, blinking slowly, processing the unexpected turn of events. He had presided over countless trials in his career, but he had never experienced a moment like this, where the clarity of a single voice reshaped the entire courtroom. The authority that usually radiated from him seemed to share space with something new, an acknowledgement of the power and insight of the young girl standing before him. Lawyers who had come prepared with strategies and rehearsed arguments now found themselves recalculating. Their notes and plans seemed almost irrelevant compared to the simple, undeniable truths Aaliyah had spoken. They whispered urgently to one another, gesturing to parts of the testimony, yet even their discussions felt muted under the weight of her words. The courtroom, usually a place where every move and argument had a rhythm and structure, now felt unpredictable, alive with the force of her impact. Witnesses who had once been confident in their statements began to fidget subtly, exchanging uneasy glances with each other. Their certainty had been challenged, their composure shaken, as Aaliyah had exposed gaps, inconsistencies, and overlooked details with a precision that made doubt unavoidable. Even those who had initially sympathized with one side or the other could not help but reconsider, forced to see the case through her perspective. The spectators reacted in ways that were both subtle and profound. Many leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, as if afraid to miss a single detail. Others whispered softly, repeating fragments of her words, amazed at the clarity and bravery she had displayed. Some simply sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of what had just happened, realizing that they had witnessed more than just a courtroom exchange. They had witnessed courage in its purest form. Even beyond the courtroom, the ripples of her words were already beginning to spread. Aaliyah's presence and insight had a quiet gravity that made people pay attention, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths and reconsider assumptions. The way she had spoken, calm yet assertive, thoughtful yet fearless, left a mark that could not easily be forgotten. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful voices are not the loudest, but the most truthful. The young girl herself remained composed, yet there was a subtle energy around her, a sense that she had done what she had set out to do. Her words had not only been heard, they had been understood. Their impact resonated in every corner of the room, shaping opinions, guiding thoughts, and altering the course of the trial. She did not boast or demand recognition, she simply stood with quiet confidence, letting the truth speak for itself. Even the court staff, usually unnoticed in the proceedings, felt the shift. The clerk paused while sorting papers, the bailiff straightened his posture, and the stenographer's fingers moved with renewed precision, capturing the words of a moment that was already historic. It was as if the entire courtroom had acknowledged, without saying so, that this young girl had changed the game, not through force or intimidation, but through honesty, intelligence, and courage. By the time the lawyers regrouped and the next phase of the trial began, the impact of Aaliyah's words had settled into the room, like a quiet but unstoppable current, flowing through the conversations, the judgments, and the perceptions of everyone present. Her statement had done more than just shift opinions, it had reshaped the courtroom itself, making it impossible for anyone to return to the way things had been. The moment was a reminder that truth, when spoken with clarity and courage, has the power to move even the most rigid walls. And though the trial would continue, everyone present knew that nothing would be quite the same again. The ripple effect of her words was only beginning, and the courtroom, the people within it, and even the outside world would carry the echo of her courage long after she had left. In that moment, Aaliyah had not just spoken, she had awakened the awareness and attention of everyone who had been there to witness her, leaving an impact that would endure far beyond the trial itself. The courtroom had settled back into a tentative rhythm, but the energy of what had just happened lingered, thick and undeniable. Aaliyah's words had not only stunned the people inside those walls, they had begun to reach far beyond them, echoing in ways that few could have predicted. News of the courtroom moment spread quickly, whispered first among those present, then carried outward by reporters, cameras, and social media. People who had not been there felt the weight of her statement almost immediately, and the story began to take on a life of its own. Across the city, messages and phone calls began circulating, describing the young girl's courage, her clarity, and the way she had turned a tense courtroom upside down. Social media feeds lit up with reactions, people expressing shock, admiration, and inspiration. Videos of her poised presence and carefully chosen words were shared widely, gaining attention from viewers who marveled at the power of a teenager to speak with such authority. It was as if her calm bravery had sparked a wave of awareness that could not be contained. Commentators and journalists began analyzing her words, replaying her statements, and discussing the implications for the trial. But more than that, they began reflecting on the broader message she had conveyed, that honesty and courage could challenge assumptions, cut through noise, and change the outcome of even the most complex situations. Teachers, students, activists, and everyday people saw in her a symbol of strength, reminding them that age, background, or circumstance did not limit the power of a voice when used wisely. Her words became a catalyst for conversation far beyond the courtroom, sparking debates about justice, truth, and empowerment. People who had never thought about their own ability to influence situations began to reconsider, inspired by the simple fact that one young girl could command attention and force reflection through nothing more than honesty, intellect, and courage. It was a moment that reminded everyone watching that sometimes, the smallest voice, when spoken with conviction, can have the largest impact. Even in her own neighborhood, Aaliyah's story traveled quickly, becoming a source of pride, encouragement, and hope. Friends, teachers, and neighbors celebrated her bravery, seeing in her the reflection of what many had always known, that she possessed a rare combination of insight, empathy, and fearlessness. Her courage became a lesson for others, showing that standing up and speaking clearly, even when faced with intimidating circumstances, could inspire more than fear or awe. It could spark real change. The courtroom itself became a symbol of what she had accomplished, a reminder that spaces often dominated by authority and procedure could still be transformed by clarity, truth, and presence. Judges, lawyers, and witnesses all carried the memory of her statement with them, reconsidering how they approached not just this trial, but others. The ripple effect of her words was subtle in some ways, profound in others, reminding everyone that a single, honest voice could resonate far beyond its immediate surroundings. As media coverage grew, conversations spread to national and even international platforms. People everywhere began discussing the moment, sharing clips, and reflecting on the courage it took to stand and speak in such a setting. The young girl who had once been a quiet observer became, overnight, a symbol of integrity, intelligence, and bravery. Her story encouraged discussions about youth empowerment, social justice, and the importance of listening to voices that might otherwise be overlooked. Aaliyah, however, remained the same, calm and focused. She did not seek fame or recognition. She had simply spoken because it was necessary, because she understood the truth and believed in its power. Yet the impact of her words could not be denied, reaching far beyond her expectations, far beyond the courtroom walls, inspiring conversations, reflections, and actions that would continue for months, perhaps years, to come. Her moment in the courtroom became more than a single event. It became a symbol, a lesson, and a story to be shared. It reminded people everywhere that the courage to speak the truth, even in the most intimidating circumstances, could change minds, hearts, and lives. It was a quiet revolution sparked by a young girl who knew that words, when chosen carefully and spoken boldly, could leave the world forever stunned. The trial eventually moved forward, the lawyers continuing their arguments and the witnesses giving their statements, but the energy in the courtroom had shifted permanently. Aaliyah's words had left a mark so deep that no one could ignore it. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered conversation was now colored by the memory of what she had said. The courtroom, which had once felt like a rigid stage of rules and procedure, now seemed alive with reflection, tension, and newfound respect. Even as the proceedings continued, the people in the room could not stop thinking about her courage. The judge, returning to his papers, occasionally paused to look up, a thoughtful expression lingering on his face. Perhaps he remembered, or perhaps he realized, that justice was not just about evidence and procedure, but about honesty, clarity, and the courage to speak when it mattered most. The lawyers, too, continued their work, but their strategies now carried a subtle weight, as if they knew that the truth, when spoken boldly and thoughtfully, could override even the most careful plans. For the spectators, the moment had become unforgettable, a memory that would replay in their minds for days, weeks, and years. The whispers that had filled the room earlier were replaced by quiet contemplation, as people reflected on what they had seen. The power of a young girl to speak the truth so clearly, so fearlessly, had reminded them of something they often forgot. That courage and honesty could resonate far beyond the moment in which they were expressed. Outside the courtroom, the story continued to grow, spreading through social media, local news, and casual conversations alike. People who had not even been present in the room were captivated, inspired, and moved by what had happened. The young girl had become more than a participant in a trial. She had become a symbol, a reminder that one voice, when spoken with conviction and clarity, could leave a lasting impact. She had reminded the world that courage did not come from size, status, or experience, but from the willingness to stand, observe, and speak the truth. Aaliyah herself remained calm, walking through the courtroom with quiet dignity. She did not seek applause or attention. She had only spoken because it was necessary, because she understood the weight of truth and the responsibility that came with knowledge. And yet, everyone around her recognized that something extraordinary had occurred. They had witnessed a moment where one person, small in stature but enormous in courage, had altered the course of a trial and captured the attention of the world. Even in the days that followed, the impact of her words continued to unfold, inspiring discussions about justice, fairness, youth empowerment, and the importance of listening to voices that might otherwise be overlooked. Teachers spoke of her bravery in classrooms, neighbors told the story to friends and family, and reporters revisited the moment, analyzing it again and again. Each retelling reinforced the message that courage and clarity could outshine fear, doubt, and expectation. Looking back, it was clear that the courtroom was more than just a place for legal proceedings that day. It had become a stage for something far greater, a demonstration of how truth, when delivered with confidence and clarity, could stun, influence, and inspire, Aaliyah had shown that even the youngest, quietest voices could change the dynamics of a room, alter minds, and create a ripple effect that extended far beyond the walls that contained them. And in the quiet moments after the trial, when the crowd had dispersed and the cameras were gone, Aaliyah stood alone for a moment, reflecting on what had happened. She felt the weight of the moment, yes, but also a quiet satisfaction, a sense that she had done what she needed to do. She had spoken honestly, observed keenly, and acted bravely, leaving a mark that could not be erased. The courtroom, the spectators, the lawyers, and even the judge had all been changed by her presence and her words, and while the trial itself would eventually reach its conclusion, what lingered most in everyone's mind was not the verdict, but the courage of the young girl who had spoken the truth, unflinching and clear, leaving the entire room, and eventually the world, stunned. Aaliyah walked out of the courtroom that day with quiet confidence, carrying not just her own strength, but the lessons of courage, clarity, and honesty that would inspire countless others. She had reminded everyone that sometimes, one voice is all it takes to awaken truth, challenge assumptions, and leave a lasting impact that reaches far beyond a single moment. The courtroom had been changed forever, but so had everyone who witnessed it, because she had spoken, and the world had listened.